Before I get started with this video, I have to give a shout out to Harvey over at Your World because he was the first person I saw do a video about this. And I was like, do I speak about this or do I not? And because I said I can easily just share the article on my Twitter account, which I eventually did. And I said, you know what? I have to say something about this because this narrative right here pisses me off so much when it comes to PC people after they commit a crime against a black person. So in case y'all haven't heard, Daniel Penny pretty much said something that would piss off just about anybody, even some of his supporters, to be quite honest. And that is, he said he cannot be racist because he was planning a trip to Africa. You heard that correctly. He said, I cannot be racist because I was planning a trip to Africa. That's right up there with I have a black spouse, right up there with I have a black friend, and right up there with I have mixed or biracial children. He said, I'm planning a trip to Africa. And I wonder how true that statement actually is. Did his lawyers tell him to say that? Or did he just come right out and actually say that? Well, like I said, let them talk long enough and eventually they will, their greatest doing will be their greatest undoing. He will eventually hang himself. And you know what? If it comes down to it, I will be A-okay with that. Daniel Penny, the man charged with second-degree manslaughter for putting Jordan Neely in what authorities say was a lethal chokehold on the New York subway, recently sat down for an interview with the New York Post. And the New York Post, those are some of his biggest fans over there. Penny and his lawyers may have calculated that an interview could provide some good press for him as he sits at the center of a political and cultural firestorm and awaits trial. But the most striking quote from the interview doesn't do the defendant any favors. Penny told the Post that the incident in which Penny, who is white, is accused of killing Neely, who was a homeless black man, had nothing to do with race, and vowed that I'm not a white supremacist. But his explanation of why the incident couldn't have anything to do with race warrants skepticism. Daniel Penny is quoted as saying, I was actually planning a road trip through Africa before this happened. How convenient for you to say that. Were you really planning a trip to Africa? Were you really? And if you were, what country were you going to? What tribe? How long were you going to be there for? What were you going to do? If it was me, if I was the one to have to interview him and he said that, I would go completely off script and be asking those kinds of questions. What country are you going to? How long are you going to be there? What tribe are you going to, explore? I would have asked him that because he could have just saying Africa. That's very vague. As we all know, Africa's a continent, is a big landmass that has well over 50 countries in it. I would have been asking him exactly where were you going in Africa? But I'm just saying it's very convenient that he said that. And I don't believe it to be true, to be quite honest. Okay, it says, I call this the latest version of some of my best friends are black defense. This reasoning neither rules out nor confirms whether Penny was motivated by racial prejudice, but ironically, it should heighten our suspicion that race was at play. On May 1st, Penny reacted to Neely behaving erratically and using threatening language on the New York subway by placing him in an extended and ultimately lethal chokehold. According to at least one eyewitness, it lasted around 15 minutes. Some critics have argued that racism was at play in the incident. Penny responded to those criticisms in his interview in the Post, saying, it's a little bit comical. Everyone who's ever met me can tell you I love all people. I love all cultures. You can tell by my past and all my travels and adventures around the world. That claim is a hollow deflection from accusations of racism. Even in an era in which the GOP has become an overt white nationalist organ and Fox News pundits float racist conspiracy theories about immigrations, it's still difficult to find people who would say in polite company that they dislike specific races or cultures. You may recall that in the same campaign season that then presidential candidate Donald Trump maligned Mexican migrants as violators, he also tweeted, I love Hispanics, alongside photos of him eating taco bowls. One can harbor bigoted ideas about a nation or an ethnicity and also make blanket statements of appreciation for the world cultures. But the big red flag in his next statement which he is stated as saying, I was actually planning a road trip through Africa before this happened. The actually has an interesting connotation in the sentence. It could be interpreted as striking a tone of contrary to how this incident makes me look. But there is nothing about planning a trip somewhere in Africa that would exonerate him from a charge of racial prejudice. There is, in fact, a long and dark history of racist white people visiting Africa, as Penny ought to know. Traveling to a place doesn't necessarily suggest one's respect for that place, nor does it mean one has immunity to bigoted beliefs or actions about people from there. There's also something vulgar about the subtext in Penny's statement that suggests that he may see Neely as more African than American. It's reminiscent of the I have black friends line, a classic maneuver in which someone accused of racism rushes to point out some fact that is really relevant to the question at hand and is usually used as a dodge. That's what's happening with Penny's claim about Africa. Notably, he has not been accused by prosecutors of acting out of racial animus. They aren't seeking to prove that Penny was a white supremacist, only that he wrongly killed Neely. I have no opinion on whether Penny harbors deep levels of prejudice toward black people or whether any such beliefs motivated his actions on that fateful day. But someone who speaks so flippantly about race and suggests that a trip he says he planned to Africa is proof of some kind of anti-racism, he doesn't strike me as exactly progressive on the subject. Penny is well within his rights to defend himself against accusations of racism, but that defense is undermined by retrograde dodges. More importantly, it will not acquit him of the charge that he committed manslaughter against Neely. I wanted to read the whole article because I was waiting to see if the author was going to mention about just because you go to Africa does not absolve you of racism, because there is a lot of racist white people in other groups who have gone to Africa. That doesn't absolve them of anything. And the fact that he just threw that in there. Now, like I said, I don't know if his lawyers told him to say that, or if he decided on his own free will to say that. Either way, that wasn't a good defense mechanism for him, but in this society, it might actually work in his favor. But that was a weird thing for him to just come right out and say. I'm like, if you're not a racist person, why would you even say that? And like I said, we as black people have to be prepared to check people when they say stuff like that. But yeah, it's right up there with the I have a black friend, or I have a black spouse, or I have mixed and biracial kids. It's right up there with that. So it's like, if I have this black friend or this black spouse or these mixed or biracial children, there's just no possible way that I can be racist. And I'm going to Africa too, where there's a majority black population. Are you kidding me? Like, there's just no way. There is no way possible that I could be a racist. That is a bunch of BS. And that is a bunch of BS a lot of white people tell themselves to make them, to try in their own mental capacity to absolve themselves of said racism. So yeah, now it's going to have people looking at Daniel Penny even more with a side eye. I mean, a lot of us was already looking at him with real shady like anyway, but now we really about to hone in on him just on this statement alone. Now, I'm curious, how many of his so-called supporters, or the ones that are out here calling him a hero, how many of them are going to talk or touch on that? But then again, they might actually talk and touch on that, and then they'll try to still play it and spin it into their own narrative. See, he's not a racist. He said he was going to visit Africa. How convenient he says that in this interview. His first interview since this has happened. Again, I don't know if his lawyers told him to say this, or if he chose to say it himself. Either way, that was a dumb move on his part. But you know what? If this is a dumb move on his part, I'm glad that he made it. Because now it's like, okay, let's stack the deck against him. He said this. Let's keep this planted into the back of our minds with all the stuff going on there. Don't forget that he said that. And I would like to see proof that he was planning a trip to Africa. How far along were you in this planning period? And can we see some kind of documentation that you was getting ready to go on this trip? And when was this trip happening anyway? Was it happening like next month? You know, in next quarter? When was this alleged trip happening? Cause like I said, if I was the one interviewing him, I would have been asking him that question. Like, you brought it up, not me. Because as the interviewer, I didn't know that. You told me, you just decided to say that. I would have tripped him up. See, they didn't have the right person in the interviewing room that day. They should have had me in there.